The briefcase hit the wet pavement with a sound like a gunshot. The latch snapped open on impact. Legal briefs, case files, and dozens of pages of a federal sentencing memorandum exploded across the soaked asphalt of the Crestwood checkpoint like confetti in the rain. Ink bled into the water. Pages curled and dissolved into the gutter. Months of careful work washed away in seconds. Officer Vance Harlan watched it happen. Then he laughed. He grabbed Judge Vivian Langford's wrists and shoved her hard against the hood of his cruiser, hard enough that she gasped and had to lean forward until his face was inches from hers. "Oops, guess you should have stayed on your side of town, sweetheart." She didn't move. He twisted her arm tighter. "What's the matter?" "Too good to answer. You black women from Millbrook are all the same. Always got something to say until you don't." A passing officer snickered. Harlan straightened up, looked down at her soaked documents still scattered across the ground, and shrugged. "Pick those up yourself. Nobody here is your assistant." She said nothing. She didn't need to. Because in the hours that followed, Vance Harlan would walk into a federal building and finally understand, in front of everyone, exactly who he had just put his hands on. "Don't you dare scroll past this one. Stay until the end, because the moment this woman walks back into her power will make your jaw drop." Tell us where you're watching from right now. And if stories about dignity, justice, and the truth finally winning mean something to you, subscribe. We're just getting started. What's going on, everybody? I travel America one story at a time, searching for the kind of moments you never forget. Pull up beside me. Judge Vivian Langford had never left Millbrook. That was the thing people never understood about her. They saw the federal robes, the decades on the bench, the Emory law degree in its mahogany frame behind her desk, and they assumed she had escaped, that she had climbed out of Millbrook the way most people climb out of places like it, fast, grateful, and without looking back. She hadn't. She still lived 2 blocks from the house where she grew up. She still bought her groceries from the same corner store on Delmar Avenue, where Mr. Hutchins had let her mother run a tab during the lean months. She still drove the same route to the federal courthouse every morning down Millbrook's wide, tree-lined streets, past the elementary school, past the Baptist church with the cracked front steps the city had promised to repair for years and never had. She drove a simple silver sedan. Nothing special. Her clerk, Sandra Ellison, had once suggested gently that a federal judge might consider something with a bit more presence. Vivian had looked at her over her reading glasses and said, "The robe is the presence, Sandra." That had been the end of that conversation. She was in her mid-50s. She had been appointed to the federal district court bench years earlier, the first black woman to hold that position in the district's history. The appointment had come after 15 years as a public defender, then a prosecutor, then a civil rights litigator, who had taken on cases that reached the Supreme Court and won most of them. She was not a woman who had been handed anything. Every single thing she had built, and she had built all of it while staying in Millbrook on purpose, because she believed with the kind of quiet and unshakable conviction that doesn't require an audience, that you don't abandon a place just because it has been abandoned by everyone else. Millbrook was predominantly black. It had always been predominantly black. It sat on the south side of Dalton, separated from the wealthier neighborhoods of Crestwood and Fairhaven by a 4-lane road called Boundary Avenue, a name that had always struck Vivian as a little too honest. Millbrook had good people, tight families, churches that fed the community every Sunday no matter who showed up, and an unemployment rate that had been climbing steadily while city resources quietly flowed north. Several months earlier, Mayor Bryce Mercer had introduced the Clean Streets Initiative. He had announced it at a press conference with a large poster board showing crime statistics and a phrase he used repeatedly: keeping Dalton safe for everyone. The program established rolling police checkpoints at the major exit roads from Millbrook. Officers would stop vehicles, request identification, run plates, and conduct what the official language called voluntary compliance checks. The checkpoints operated in the evening hours, exactly when Millbrook residents were commuting home from work. Vivian had read the ordinance the day it was published. She had read it carefully, the way she read everything, slowly, looking for the architecture beneath the language, the intention hiding inside the procedure. What she found had kept her awake for nights. The ordinance was structured to be defensible. Mercer had good lawyers, but defensible and constitutional are not always the same thing, and the gap between them was exactly where the damage was being done. In the months that followed the program's launch, Vivian had begun quietly collecting data. Not officially. Not yet. She had simply asked. She had talked to people at church, at the grocery store, at the school board meetings she still attended, even though she had no children enrolled. She had asked them to write things down. Dates, times, badge numbers, what was said, what was searched, what happened afterward. Dozens of people had come to her. Dozens of documented checkpoint stops, extended detentions without cause. Searches conducted without consent and without probable cause. Arrests for obstruction when residents cited their constitutional rights. She had read every single account. She had organized them in a folder she kept in the locked bottom drawer of her desk at home, not at the courthouse. She had been building something. She just hadn't expected to become part of it herself. On a rainy evening, Vivian left the federal courthouse after a sentencing hearing that had run long. A young man from Millbrook whose defense attorney had done everything right and still needed more time. She had given it to him. She always gave people the time they needed. She stopped at the gas station on Forest Street, filled her tank, bought a bottle of water. She pulled back onto the road heading south toward Millbrook, the sedan's headlights cutting through the rain. She saw the checkpoint from 2 blocks away. Blue lights pulsing against the wet street. 3 cruisers. A white command van. Officers in reflective vests waving traffic into a single lane. She exhaled slowly. She had driven through this checkpoint multiple times in recent months without incident. That was not unusual. Not every stop escalated. The pattern wasn't in every interaction. It was in the cumulative data, in the demographics of who got waved through and who got pulled aside. She rolled down her window, reached for her registration in the glove compartment, and set both hands visible on the steering wheel. Officer Vance Harlan approached from the left. His flashlight swept across her face and held there a beat too long. He looked at her license, then at her address. "Millbrook resident," he said into his radio. "Run enhanced verification." Vivian heard the emphasis. She had heard it before. "Is there a problem with my identification, officer?" Harlan didn't answer. He walked back to the cruiser. In the rear-view mirror, she watched him show her license to another officer. They looked at her car. One of them said something. The other laughed. Then the door of the command van opened and Sergeant Trent Keller stepped out. Keller moved like a man who had never once been told no. He was broad across the shoulders, in his mid-40s, with a sergeant's stripes and the kind of slow, deliberate walk designed to communicate one thing above everything else: that he was in no hurry because you were going to wait for him regardless. He approached the driver's side of her sedan and stood there for a moment without speaking, flashlight aimed at her face. "Step out of the vehicle, ma'am." No greeting, no explanation, just the command, flat and final. Vivian kept her hands on the steering wheel. "May I ask the reason, Sergeant?" "My license is valid. My registration is current." "Step out. Enhanced compliance protocol." Under Terry versus Ohio, enhanced compliance protocol requires articulated, reasonable suspicion. Vivian said, her voice even and precise. "What is your reasonable suspicion?" Keller tilted his head slightly. Behind him, Harlan had drifted closer. "Oh, we got a law professor," Harlan said loud enough to carry. A second officer near the command van snorted. Keller ignored the commentary. "Out of the vehicle. Last time I'm asking." His hand moved to rest on his belt near his radio. Not his weapon, not yet. But the message was plain. Vivian opened the door and stepped out slowly. Movements deliberate. Nothing sudden. The rain was fine and cold against her face. She was still in her work clothes, dark blazer, pressed slacks, the small gold pin on her lapel that she had worn every day for years, a gift from her mother the morning of her first day on the bench. "I'd like your badge numbers, please, both of you," she said, looking at Harlan, then back to Keller. "And I'd like to note for the record that I am complying voluntarily and under protest." "There's no record," Keller said. "There is mine," Vivian replied. She had her phone in her jacket pocket. She had pressed record before she stepped out of the car. "Hands on the hood," Keller said. She placed her hands on the hood of his cruiser. The metal was cold and wet. She looked straight ahead. Harlan moved to her right. She tracked him in her peripheral vision. "We're going to conduct a brief search, ma'am. Standard protocol." "I do not consent to a search," Vivian said clearly. "Delaware versus Prowse establishes that checkpoint stops must be limited in scope. I am not consenting to anything beyond the initial identification request." "Sounds like somebody Googled some stuff on the way here," Harlan said. "I didn't Google it," Vivian said. "I argued it." Neither officer responded to that. Keller reached for her satchel, which she had set on the hood beside her hands. "What's in the bag?" "Legal documents. I'm an attorney." "We'll verify that," Keller said, unzipping it without asking again. Vivian watched him riffle through the contents. Her sentencing memorandum, case files, reading glasses, her federal court ID badge at the bottom. Keller lifted the badge, glanced at it, set it aside without comment. He either didn't register what it said or didn't care. "Take her," he said to Harlan. Then to Vivian. "We're going to need you to come with us while we run additional verification." "On what basis?" "On the basis that I said so." 3 cars back in the queue. A woman had her phone out recording. Vivian could see it in her peripheral vision. Keller noticed it too. He signaled to a third officer with 2 fingers. That officer walked back down the line, knocking on windows, making people put their phones away. "Your body camera light is off, Officer Harlan," Vivian said calmly. "I'm noting that for the record." "Then mind your own." Harlan stopped himself, started again. "Equipment malfunctions happen." "At very convenient times," Vivian observed. Keller stepped close. "You've got a real mouth on you for someone in your position." "My position is standing in the rain, having my constitutional rights violated," Vivian said. "I'd say my mouth is the least remarkable thing about this situation." Something shifted in Keller's expression. Not anger exactly, more like the particular irritation of a man who had expected fear and received something else entirely. "Cuff her," he said to Harlan. "Obstruction of a lawful checkpoint inspection." "I cited legal precedent," Vivian said. "That is not obstruction." "It is when I say it is." Harlan came around behind her. The cuffs went on fast, tighter than necessary. She felt the metal bite into her wrists, sharp and immediate. She did not cry out. She straightened her spine instead. "Book her, Vivian Langford," Harlan said with a smirk in his voice. "You're under arrest for obstruction of justice and resisting a lawful checkpoint inspection." "I did not resist," she said clearly, loudly, for the phone still recording in her pocket. "I am complying under protest. I am invoking my right to counsel, and I am noting that this arrest is being conducted without probable cause." Keller picked up her satchel. He unzipped it again, found her badge, looked at it properly this time, and for just a fraction of a second, something flickered across his face, something that might have been uncertainty. Then he re-zipped the bag and handed it to Harlan. "Put it in evidence." They walked her to the cruiser. Harlan pressed her head down as she got in. The door slammed. Through the rain-streaked window, she watched Keller walk back toward the command van, already on his radio. She sat straight in the back seat, wrists aching, rain on the glass. She had dozens of names in a folder at home. Tonight she had become one more, and her phone was still recording. The Dalton Police Department. Central booking room smelled of floor wax and cold coffee, and something underneath both of those things, something older and harder to name. Vivian had been in this room before, not as a defendant but as a public defender years earlier, standing next to a young man from Millbrook who had been stopped 3 blocks from his own house and charged with possession that the arresting officer had somehow failed to log correctly. She had gotten the charges dropped. She still remembered his name. He was a paramedic now. She stood at the booking counter and let the process move around her. Mug shot, fingerprints, the ink cold and thick against her skin. The booking officer, a heavy-set man who had not looked up from his computer since she arrived, typed without expression. "Occupation," he said. "Attorney," Vivian said. He typed it, didn't look up. Behind her, near the water cooler, Harlan and Keller had positioned themselves with the specific casualness of men who wanted to be seen not caring. They were talking loudly enough to be heard. "That's another one from Millbrook with a law degree she printed off the internet," Harlan said. He laughed at his own joke. Keller kept his voice lower, but not low enough. "They all think knowing a few case names makes them special. Looked her up on the way over. Nothing, nobody. Probably a paralegal somewhere acting like she passed the bar." The booking officer's typing slowed almost imperceptibly. He still didn't look up. Vivian said nothing. She pressed her thumb against the scanner a second time when it asked her to. She looked straight ahead. Her satchel sat in a clear evidence bag on the counter beside her. Through the plastic, she could see the corner of her federal court ID badge. It was facing down. Keller had put it back in the bag facing down, which meant he had looked at it properly, read what it said, and made a deliberate choice about what to do with that information. That choice was itself a piece of evidence. She was allowed 1 phone call. The booking officer pointed to a wall-mounted phone at the end of the counter without speaking. Vivian walked to it. She dialed from memory, not her personal attorney, not her husband, not the courthouse's main line. She called Sandra Ellison's cell phone. Sandra picked up on the second ring. "Sandra, it's Vivian," she said. Her voice was completely level. "I need you to write some things down." A pause. Then Sandra's voice, careful and steady. "I'm writing. I'm at Dalton PD Central booking. I was arrested at the Boundary Avenue checkpoint this evening. Arresting officers are Harlan, badge number I need you to get, and Sergeant Trent Keller. Charges are obstruction and checkpoint interference. My phone recorded from the time I exited the vehicle until they put me in the cruiser. It is currently in the evidence bag with my satchel." She paused. "Call Marshal Elias Thorne at the marshal's office. Personal cell, not the office line. Tell him what I just told you." Another pause, longer this time. "Vivian." Sandra's voice was barely above a whisper. "Are you all right?" "I'm fine," Vivian said. "Write everything down." She hung up. They walked her to a holding cell. The door was metal, painted gray over older paint of a different gray. It clanged shut with the particular resonance of things designed to be final. She sat on the metal bench along the wall, back straight, feet flat on the floor, hands folded in her lap over her aching wrists. The fluorescent light above her flickered once, twice, then held. She heard a new voice in the booking area. Male, clipped, impatient. "Where is she?" A pause. Then the booking officer's voice, lower, answering. "In holding cell 3. "Good." Footsteps, then quieter but still audible through the thin walls. "Process her quickly. No press contact. The mayor wants this handled before morning." Vivian recognized the voice. She had heard it at city council public comment sessions where she had sat in the back row listening. It belonged to Jeffrey Sloan, Mayor Mercer's senior aide, the one who had drafted the Clean Streets Initiative ordinance language. She heard Harlan's voice next. "She says she's a federal judge." A short laugh from Sloan. "They always say something. Process her." "Yes, sir." Vivian sat in the silence that followed and did what she had trained herself to do in every courtroom, in every difficult moment across decades of legal practice. She organized, she cataloged, she built the case inside her mind piece by piece. The way you lay a foundation carefully in the right order. Nothing placed before the thing beneath it is solid. The cuffs had been too tight. That was documented on her wrists. The body camera had been off. She had stated it aloud on her recording. Her ID badge had been seen, read, and deliberately ignored. That was a choice, not an oversight. Sloane's presence at the station, his instructions to process her quickly and keep the press away. That was a direct line from this holding cell to the mayor's office. And Sandra Ellison was already on the phone with Marshal Elias Thorne. Vivian looked up in the flickering light above her. She had dozens of names in a folder at home. She had always known it might come to this. She had not known it would be tonight or that it would be her. But she had prepared for it regardless. The way you prepare for weather, you can't prevent. Not by wishing it away, but by making sure that when it arrives, you are ready. Detective Darius Holt walked past the cell door. He glanced in, stopped. He looked at her face for a long moment, and then his expression changed completely. Darius Holt had been a detective with Dalton PD for years. He had worked homicide, narcotics, and general investigations. A deliberately vague assignment that mostly meant he handled whatever cases nobody else wanted to touch. He was good at his job in the way that people who care about the work are always good at it. Not because they're chasing promotions, but because the alternative, doing it badly, doing it carelessly, letting things fall through the cracks that shouldn't, was something he couldn't live with. He had appeared before Judge Vivian Langford multiple times. The first time, she had suppressed evidence in a narcotics case he had built over months because the search warrant had a procedural flaw he hadn't caught. He had been furious. He had gone home that night and read the warrant again and found the flaw himself, and then sat quietly at his kitchen table for a long time, because she had been right. Completely, unambiguously right. The second time she had accepted his testimony in a civil rights case against a landlord and cited his detective work, specifically in her written ruling. He had read that ruling multiple times. The third time, months earlier, he had appeared as a witness in a wrongful arrest case involving a Millbrook resident. He had told the truth on the stand. Judge Langford had thanked him for his precision. He knew her face. He knew it the moment he looked through the cell door and saw her sitting on that metal bench with her back straight and her hands folded in her lap, and something cold and heavy settled in his chest. He kept walking. He had to. Keller was 20 feet away, but he was already thinking. Chief Raymond Odell arrived. His presence in the building at this hour was itself unusual. Odell was a man who managed from a distance. He signed things, attended press conferences, shook hands at community events, and let his sergeants run the operational machinery. He did not show up to booking rooms late on weeknights unless someone had told him he needed to. Someone had told him he needed to. He came into the booking area with his jacket still on, keys in his hand, like he had driven himself, which meant he hadn't wanted a record of a department vehicle at the station. Holt noted that detail from across the room and said nothing. Odell spoke briefly with Keller, then walked to the interrogation room. Keller went to holding and brought Vivian out. Holt watched her walk past. She walked the same way she had walked into his courtroom, unhurried, upright, completely composed. Keller had his hand on her arm. She didn't look at it. The interrogation room door closed. Holt moved to the hallway outside it and found something to do near the filing cabinet that required him to stay there. Inside the room, Odell's voice was careful, measured, the voice of a man who had been briefed on the situation and was trying to manage it. "Let's keep this simple," he said. "Sign the citation, pay a fine, you're home soon. We call it a misunderstanding." "I invoke my right to counsel," Vivian said, "and my right to remain silent." "You can have counsel in the morning. Tonight we're just talking. Continuing to question me after I've invoked my rights is a Miranda violation, Chief. I'd like you to note that I have now invoked twice." A pause. Then Odell's voice, slightly less measured. "Nobody here is questioning you. We're having a conversation. A conversation I did not consent to and am not participating in." The sound of a chair scraping. Footsteps. Harlan's voice now from the corner of the room. "Now we pulled your bag, sweetheart. Found your little ID badge, federal court. Nice. You work there. File papers, empty the trash cans. Vivian said nothing. Because we called over there, Harlan continued, which was a lie. Holt knew nobody had called anywhere yet. And nobody's heard of you. Took EK. Add fraud to the charges if you believe it's fake. Vivian said evenly, that will be an interesting position to defend. Odell's voice again, quieter. Where did you get that ID? I was appointed to the federal district court bench years ago, Vivian said, by the President of the United States. Senate confirmation vote was overwhelming. The ID is issued by the Administrative Office of the U.S. Courts. It has a federal holographic seal, a security thread, and my judicial circuit number on the reverse. You're welcome to verify any of that. Silence. Then Odell, very carefully. If that's true, it is true, Vivian said. And you know it is. Another silence. Longer. Harlan again, but quieter now, something uncertain edging into his voice for the first time. Even if she is a judge, she still obstructed. Citing constitutional precedent is not obstruction, Vivian said. I have now told 3 officers that tonight. I will tell a federal grand jury the same thing. The room went very still. Holt in the hallway heard Odell say something low and urgent to Harlan. He couldn't make out the words. Then the door opened, and Odell stepped out, nearly walked into Holt, and stopped. The 2 men looked at each other. Chief, Holt said carefully, have we verified her credentials? Odell's jaw tightened. Handle your own caseload, detective. He walked away. Holt looked at the closed interrogation room door for a long moment. Then he reached into his jacket pocket, took out his personal cell phone, and walked to the far end of the hallway, where the cameras had a known blind spot. He opened his camera app and started photographing everything. The front desk phone rang. The officer on desk duty, a young man named Torres, who had been with the department for just over a year and had spent most of the night trying to look like he wasn't noticing anything, picked it up on the second ring. Dalton PD Central. This is the federal court clerk's office for the Northern District of Georgia. The voice on the other end was crisp and unhesitating. We're calling regarding the detention of a federal judicial officer. Please connect me with whoever is in charge of that booking. Torres looked at the phone, then across the room at Keller, who was refilling his coffee. One moment, Torres said. He put the call on hold and walked to Keller, with the particular careful speed of someone who does not want to run, but very much wants to. Keller took the call in the side office. Through the glass partition, Torres watched his expression move through several distinct phases. Mild annoyance, then a particular focused stillness, then something Torres had never seen on Keller's face before. Uncertainty. Keller came out of the side office minutes later and went directly to find Odell. Torres went back to his desk and sat very still and did not reach for his own phone, because he understood with the instinct of someone young enough to still have instincts that whatever was happening tonight was the kind of thing you wanted a clear record of having stayed completely out of. In the hallway outside the interrogation room, Holt had just finished photographing the booking log when his own desk phone buzzed. A text from a number he recognized as the marshal's office duty line. Aware of situation, ETA 25 minutes. Keep the scene intact. He read it twice, put his phone away, and walked back toward the booking area with his hands in his pockets and his face arranged into the expression of a man who had nowhere particular to be. The front desk phone rang again. Then the second line lit up simultaneously. Torres answered the first. U.S. Marshal Service, asking for the watch commander. The second line was the Department of Justice duty officer. Within minutes, multiple lines were lit on the front desk panel. Odell was in the side office with the door closed. Through the glass, Torres could see him on his personal cell phone, not the department line. Jeffrey Sloan reappeared from wherever he had been waiting and came to stand at the booking counter. His earlier composure had developed a fine visible crack, something around the eyes, something in the way he was standing slightly forward on the balls of his feet, like a man preparing to move quickly in a direction he hadn't yet decided on. "What's happening with the phones?" he asked Torres. "Multiple incoming calls regarding the detainee, sir," Torres said in the flattest voice he could manage. "From whom?" Torres looked at his notepad. "Federal Court Clerk's Office, U.S. Marshals Service, Department of Justice Duty Line, and the Office of the State Attorney General." Sloan said nothing. His face did something complicated. "They're all asking for her by name," Torres added because he felt it was relevant. "And by title." Sloan turned and walked quickly back toward the side office where Odell was still on his phone. He knocked once and went in without waiting for an answer. In the hallway, Holt heard raised voices through the office wall. Not words, just the shape of an argument. The rhythm of two men trying to reassign blame in real time. He walked past the holding cells, stopped at cell 3, looked in. Vivian Langford was sitting exactly as she had been earlier. Same posture, same stillness. She looked up at him. "Detective Holt," she said quietly, his name. She remembered his name. "Your Honor," he said. The words came out before he decided to say them, pulled by something stronger than caution. "Is there anything I can do?" She looked at him for a moment, measuring. She had spent years reading people across a courtroom, reading the ones who were telling the truth, and the ones who were almost telling the truth, and the ones who thought they were hiding something they weren't hiding at all. "You can make sure every phone call this station receives in the next 30 minutes gets properly logged," she said. Succinctly, with the exact time, the originating office, and the name of the officer who took it. "Already doing that," Holt said. Something shifted in her expression. Not surprise exactly, more like recognition. "There's a journalist in the parking lot," she said. It was not a question. Holt paused. "What makes you say that?" "Sandra Ellison is extremely thorough," Vivian said simply. Holt glanced toward the front of the building. Through the narrow window at the end of the cell block hallway, he could see the parking lot. A news van, lights off, was parked at the far edge near the street. A woman stood beside it with a camera. He turned back to Vivian. "Your clerk called her. Sandra calls everyone," Vivian said. "That's why she has the job." Holt almost smiled. He reached into his jacket pocket. He had been carrying the USB drive for months, compiled quietly, carefully, on his own time, on his own equipment from his own observations. Every time he had tried to move it through internal channels, it had disappeared into a silence that told him exactly what the silence meant. He looked down the hallway in both directions. Then he slid the drive through the cell door bars onto the bench beside her. "Months of checkpoint data," he said quietly. "Internal complaint logs. Body cam scheduling records showing camera deactivations. Demographic arrest breakdowns by checkpoint location." He met her eyes. "I couldn't get anyone to take it." "I'll take it," Vivian said. She picked it up without looking at it, and placed it in her blazer's inside pocket, with the calm of someone filing a document. "What happens now?" From the front of the building came the sound of a vehicle pulling into the parking lot, then another. The blue-white sweep of headlights across the ceiling of the cell block hallway. "Now," Vivian said. "The door opens." And then they both heard it. Firm footsteps in the booking room. A voice cutting cleanly through every other sound in the building. And the particular quality of silence that falls over a room when everyone in it suddenly understands that the situation has changed. "U.S. Marshals Service, I'm here for Judge Vivian Langford." Marshal Elias Thorne was in his early 50s, 6'2", and had the kind of face that gave nothing away because it had been trained over decades in federal law enforcement to give nothing away. He walked into the Dalton PD booking room with 2 deputies behind him and a federal paperwork packet under his arm. And the room, which had been operating at the particular low-grade chaos of a place where everyone is pretending to be calm while quietly panicking, went completely silent. Torres stopped typing mid-word. The officer by the water cooler set his cup down and didn't pick it up again. Harlan, who had been leaning against the far wall with his arms crossed in the posture of a man trying to project that everything was fine, straightened slowly and then seemed uncertain what to do with his hands. Thorne looked at no one in particular and said to the room, "I need the watch commander, the arresting officers, and the detainee right now." Odell emerged from the side office. His jacket was buttoned wrong. He hadn't noticed. "Marshal," he said, extending a hand. "Chief Raymond Odell. I think there may have been some confusion tonight regarding a federal judicial officer," Thorne said. He didn't take the hand. "Where is she?" A beat. Then Odell nodded toward the cell block. "Holding cell 3, but I want to be clear that the arrest was conducted in full accordance with," Thorne said, opening his packet and setting a document on the booking counter. "Title 18 provides federal protection to judicial officers in the performance of their duties. An arrest of a sitting federal judge without prior coordination with the Marshal Service constitutes a federal jurisdictional violation. I have authorization from the duty judge of the circuit to take custody of Judge Langford effective immediately." He slid the document across the counter without looking at it again. "Officers Harlan and Keller, do not leave this building." Keller opened his mouth. "Do not," Thorne said without raising his voice. "Leave this building." Keller closed his mouth. Holt appeared from the cell block hallway and walked directly to Thorne. "Detective Darius Holt, I'll take you to her." Thorne looked at him for exactly 1 second, the kind of look that takes a full inventory, and nodded. They walked to cell 3. Holt produced his key. The door swung open. Vivian Langford stood as it opened, and the act of standing, unhurried, complete, with the same precision she brought to every movement, somehow managed to fill the doorway more thoroughly than anyone else in the building had filled any space all night. Thorne straightened. Not quite a salute, but close. "Your Honor, I apologize for the delay." "You made good time, Marshal," Vivian said. Holt produced a small key and removed her handcuffs. He did it carefully, aware of the bruising already visible on her wrists. "My apologies, Your Honor," he said formally. "This should not have happened." "No," she agreed. "It shouldn't have." She looked at him directly. "But I'm glad you were here." They walked her back through the cell block and into the booking area. The room rearranged itself around her passage. People stepping back, eyes dropping, the involuntary physical response of people who are beginning to understand the magnitude of what has occurred. Harlan had gone pale. Not the pale of embarrassment. The pale of a man doing arithmetic and not liking the answer. Sloan was still near the booking counter. He looked at Vivian as she passed and made one final attempt, the last reflex of a man whose entire professional identity was built on controlling narratives. "Judge Langford," he said, "on behalf of the mayor's office, I want to assure you that tonight was an isolated—" "Mr. Sloan," Vivian said without stopping or turning her head. "I know exactly what tonight was." She stopped at the booking counter, looked at the evidence bag containing her satchel, looked at Torres. "My property, please." Torres had it unsealed and across the counter in seconds. Vivian took her satchel, checked the contents briefly, and removed her federal court ID badge. She held it for a moment, the badge that Keller had seen, read, and set aside, and then clipped it to her lapel, beside the small gold pin her mother had given her. She turned to face the room. "Chief Odell," she said. Her voice was not raised. It didn't need to be. "This station is subject to a federal evidence preservation order, effective as of this moment. No records, no digital files, no body camera footage, no communications are to be altered, deleted, or transferred. Marshal Thorne's team will be providing written confirmation of that order within the hour." Odell's jacket was still buttoned wrong. He nodded. "Sergeant Keller, Officer Harlan." She looked at each of them in turn. "You will both receive formal notification of federal proceedings within days. I would strongly suggest you contact personal legal counsel before morning." Neither of them spoke. The front door of the station opened. Through it came the sound of a camera, the specific mechanical click of a news camera locking focus, and a wash of cold night air. Tamara Wells was on the front steps. Her camera operator was already filming. The broadcast had been live for several minutes. Vivian walked through the door and into the night. She stopped on the top step, straightened her blazer, and looked directly into the camera without any apparent surprise at finding it there. She said nothing for a long moment, just stood there. A black woman in a rain-damp blazer, with a federal badge on her lapel and bruises on her wrists, standing in the light of a news camera outside a police station in the middle of the night. That image, that single, still, devastating image, would be on the front page of newspapers by morning. And, inside the station, nobody moved. By morning, the conference room at Dalton PD looked nothing like a conference room anymore. Federal evidence technicians had covered 3 walls with printed documents, timeline charts, and checkpoint maps. 2 laptop stations ran continuous data analysis. A large screen at the head of the table displayed a live feed of checkpoint camera footage, sorted, indexed, and time-stamped by a DOJ digital forensics team that had arrived in a van with federal plates and no markings. Vivian Langford sat at the head of the table. She had changed into a clean jacket that Sandra Ellison had brought from the courthouse. Sandra had arrived with the jacket, a thermos of coffee, a yellow legal pad, and the expression of a woman who had been waiting her entire career for exactly this moment. Chief Odell sat at the far end of the table, flanked by 2 department attorneys who had been called in from home and were still visibly unhappy about it. Keller and Harlan sat apart from each other along the side wall, each with a union representative beside them. Jeffrey Sloan sat alone near the door, his phone confiscated, earlier composure entirely gone. Mayor Bryce Mercer had not yet arrived. His office had confirmed he was on his way. Vivian looked at the room and began. Several months ago, I began receiving accounts from Millbrook residents describing encounters at the Clean Streets Initiative checkpoints. I documented dozens of separate incidents before tonight. Tonight, I became one more. She nodded to Holt, who connected his laptop to the main display. The checkpoint map appeared. Red markers clustered in a single dense formation, every checkpoint positioned at the exit roads from Millbrook, not at intersections across the city, not near the areas where the mayor's own crime statistics showed the highest incident rates, exclusively at the boundaries of one neighborhood. Checkpoint placement, Vivian said. Every installation concentrated at Millbrook's perimeter. 0 checkpoints in Crestwood, Fairhaven, or the River District. The stated justification was traffic-based crime reduction. The actual placement targets residential exit patterns from a single demographic area. She changed the display. Split-screen footage from checkpoint cameras. Unedited, time-stamped, pulled directly from the department's own servers. Left screen. A white driver in a late-model SUV, checkpoint stop, license examined, vehicle waved through, total elapsed time under a minute. Right screen, a black driver in a Millbrook registered sedan, extended stop, asked to exit the vehicle. Bags searched without consent, detained for an extended period, no charges, no explanation given upon release. This pattern, Vivian said, repeats across hundreds of documented stops. Of all extended detentions, stops lasting more than a few minutes, the vast majority involved black drivers. Of all arrests resulting from checkpoint stops, nearly all involved Millbrook residents. Odell's attorney leaned over and whispered something. Odell stared at the table. Vivian changed the display again. An audio file. She played it without preamble. Keller's voice filled the room, clear, unambiguous, recorded during a pre-shift briefing weeks earlier by a patrol officer who had subsequently been reassigned and who had, before his reassignment, sent the file to Holt. Millbrook tags get the full package. You stop them. You find something or you find a reason. The numbers need to come up before the end of the month. The councilman's been on the chief about it. The room was very still. Harlan's union representative put down his pen. Vivian let the silence hold for several seconds. Then she moved to the documentary evidence. Mercer's signature appeared on the screen. attached to a checkpoint operational directive that specified in language that was careful, but not careful enough that enhanced screening protocols were to be applied to vehicles registered to addresses within what the document called high-yield demographic zones. The document listed zip codes. All of them were Millbrook zip codes. This directive, Vivian said, was drafted by the mayor's office and personally signed by Mayor Mercer. It was implemented by Chief Odell and operationalized by Sergeant Keller. She advanced the display. Developer correspondence, emails between a real estate investment group and Jeffrey Sloan's personal email address, not his city account. Months of planning, acquisition strategy, projected timelines for property value reduction in Millbrook, references to the checkpoint program as a market conditioning tool. Sloan looked at the screen, then at the table, then at nothing. The Clean Streets Initiative, Vivian said quietly, was not a public safety program. It was a displacement strategy. Residents of Millbrook were harassed, detained, and arrested without cause, not to reduce crime but to make them leave, to depress property values, to clear the way for a development project worth hundreds of millions. She put 4 photographs on the screen side by side. 4 Millbrook residents. Marcus Ellison, detained at a checkpoint, subsequent wrongful arrest, lost his EMT certification during legal proceedings. He was currently unable to work in his field. Diane Okoro, detained, arrested for obstruction after citing her rights. Her nursing license was suspended pending the criminal charge, which was later dropped. The suspension remained on record. Tyler Grant, detained, arrested, lost his scholarship. He did not re-enroll at the time. Corporal James Whitfield, retired U.S. Army, detained multiple times, filed formal complaints. All were marked resolved without investigation. The room was completely silent. "These are 4 of many," Vivian said. "There are dozens more." The conference room door opened. Mayor Bryce Mercer walked in, his communications director 2 steps behind him and already whispering. Mercer looked at the screen, his own signature large and clear, and stopped walking. His communications director kept whispering. Mercer didn't appear to hear her. He looked at Vivian Langford sitting at the head of the table in a clean jacket with a federal badge on her lapel, and his political face, the one he had been wearing for decades, the one that had carried him through multiple elections, collapsed entirely. "I can explain," he started. "You'll have that opportunity," Vivian said, "in front of a federal grand jury." Dawn came to Dalton slowly. Federal agents had joined the team inside the station. 2 DOJ attorneys sat at the end of the conference table with subpoena packets already prepared. State Attorney General Claire Fenton's office had called and confirmed she was personally driving down from Atlanta. Outside, the parking lot had become something else entirely. Tamara Wells had been live since the middle of the night. Her station had run the broadcast continuously. By morning, the network affiliate had picked it up. By sunrise, it was national. The image of Vivian Langford standing on the station steps, still composed, bruises on her wrists, federal badge on her lapel, had been shared widely. The hashtag was simple. Hashtag Judge Langford. Millbrook residents had begun gathering in the parking lot in the early morning hours. Not in protest. There were no signs, no chanting, no organized presence of any kind. They simply came. An elderly woman in a church coat, a young man in a delivery uniform who had apparently come straight from a night shift, families, neighbors, people who had been stopped at those checkpoints and people who knew people who had been stopped, which in Millbrook meant nearly everyone. By morning, there were over 200 people standing quietly in the cold, watching the building. Torres, still at the front desk after a long shift, looked out the front window at them and felt something shift permanently in his understanding of his own profession. Inside, the formal proceedings had begun. Mercer, Odell, Keller, and Harlan had been separated into different rooms hours earlier. Each had a lawyer. Each lawyer had, within the first minutes of reviewing the evidence, given their client a version of the same advice. Cooperate. because the alternative is significantly worse. Sloan had requested immunity in exchange for testimony. The DOJ attorneys were reviewing the request. Harlan's body camera records had been pulled from the department's server. The gap during which his camera had been manually deactivated, from the moment Vivian cited Terry versus Ohio until the moment she was in the cruiser, had been automatically flagged by the department's own body camera management system. The flag had been manually cleared by Keller the following morning. That clearing action was itself logged. The timestamp gap was a federal obstruction charge. The manual clearing of the flag was a second one. Holt sat in a small office near the evidence room writing his formal statement in longhand on a yellow legal pad because he wanted a record that could not be altered digitally. He had been writing for hours. He was thorough. He had always been thorough. He wrote down everything, the months of observation, the complaint files he had seen marked closed without review, the patrol officer who had been reassigned after raising concerns, the body camera scheduling patterns showing deactivations that clustered disproportionately at Millbrook checkpoints. He wrote down the date he had compiled the USB drive. He wrote down the date he had first tried to submit it through internal channels and the name of the supervisor who had accepted it without response. He wrote down the night in precise chronological order, beginning from the moment he had walked past cell 3 and seen her face. When he finished, he signed it and dated it, and slid it under the door of the room where the DOJ attorney was working. Attorney General Claire Fenton arrived. She was in her early 60s, silver-haired, and had the reputation of someone who had spent decades doing the right thing at the cost of doing the easy thing, which had made her both respected and inconvenient to a succession of governors who had appointed her expecting something more manageable. She conferred with Vivian for several minutes in a side office, door closed. When they came out, Fenton went directly to the conference room, and the formal charging announcements began. Mayor Bryce Mercer, federal civil rights conspiracy, abuse of power and misuse of public funds. State charges pending. Chief Raymond Odell, obstruction of justice, civil rights violations under color of law, failure to supervise. Sergeant Trent Keller, civil rights violations under color of law, obstruction, evidence tampering. Officer Vance Harlan, civil rights violations under color of law, excessive use of force, obstruction. Jeffrey Sloan, conspiracy, misuse of public office, pending cooperation agreement review. Each name was read without drama, without theater, by a DOJ attorney in a gray suit who read from a document with the flat precision of someone reading a grocery list, which somehow made it worse or better, depending on where you were sitting. Mercer's communications director had been trying to reach the mayor's press contact for hours. The contact had stopped answering by morning. Later that morning, Vivian Langford walked out of the station's front entrance and down the steps toward the gathered crowd. She was still in yesterday's clothes. She hadn't slept. She walked to the edge of the stage and stopped, and the crowd, more than 200 people by then, went completely quiet. She looked at them for a moment, all of them, the elderly woman in the church coat, the young man in the delivery uniform, the families, the neighbors, the people who had driven through those checkpoints and been stopped, and been searched, and been arrested, and been told in 100 different ways on 100 different mornings that their rights were conditional, and their dignity was negotiable. "This was never about me," she said. Her voice carried clearly in the cold morning air. "It was about every one of you who came before me and had no one to call. That changes now." Nobody cheered. Nobody needed to. The elderly woman in the church coat pressed both hands to her heart. That was enough. The Clean Streets Initiative checkpoint program was terminated by court order within days. The order was signed by the presiding judge of the Federal District Court for the Northern District of Georgia. That judge was Vivian Langford. She had recused herself from the criminal proceedings against Mercer and the others as required. But the checkpoint program itself fell under her court's civil jurisdiction, and she signed the termination order before her first scheduled hearing of the day, with the same deliberate precision she brought to every document that passed under her pen. She kept the signed copy. She framed it. She hung it in her office at home. not at the courthouse, next to a photograph of Millbrook, taken from the corner of Delmar Avenue on a Sunday morning. The trees, the church steps, the ordinary, beautiful life of a neighborhood that had survived everything that had been done to it. The outcomes arrived in the weeks and months that followed in the methodical, unglamorous way that justice actually moves when it moves honestly. Mayor Bryce Mercer resigned the mayoralty within a week of his indictment. His resignation statement was 4 sentences long and contained no admission of wrongdoing, which his attorney had advised, and which fooled no one. His federal trial was scheduled for the following spring. The real estate investment group quietly withdrew their Millbrook development proposal. Several of the firm's principals were named as unindicted co-conspirators in the federal filing. Chief Raymond Odell was terminated from the department within days. He faced multiple criminal counts. His pension was under review pending the outcome of proceedings. Sergeant Trent Keller and Officer Vance Harlan surrendered their badges on the same afternoon in the same room without looking at each other. Harlan's union representation had withdrawn days earlier. The federal obstruction charges relating to the body camera carried a potential sentence of several years. His attorney was negotiating a plea. Jeffrey Sloan accepted a cooperation agreement. His testimony, delivered over several days, filled in the financial architecture of the displacement strategy in detail that even the federal investigators described as more comprehensive than expected. Sloan, it turned out, had kept records of everything. Old habit, his attorney explained. Vivian, reading the transcript later, thought, old habit or old insurance. Either way, it held. The case reviews began within weeks. Hundreds of convictions stemming from Clean Streets Initiative checkpoint stops were flagged for formal review. By mid-December, the vast majority had been expunged. The process was not fast enough. Nothing in the legal system ever is. But it moved with an urgency that reflected the particular attention of a federal judiciary that had watched one of its own members put in handcuffs for citing Terry versus Ohio. Marcus Ellison received written notification of his expungement. His EMT certification was reinstated within days. He was back on shift before Thanksgiving. Diane Okoro's nursing license suspension was lifted. The state licensing board issued a formal written apology. 2 paragraphs carefully worded that said everything and nothing simultaneously. She framed it anyway. She said it was a reminder. Tyler Grant re-enrolled at Georgia State for the spring semester. He had decided during the months between losing his scholarship and getting it back that he wanted to study law. Vivian heard this from Sandra Ellison, who heard it from someone at the church on Delmar Avenue, which was how most of the information worth knowing in Millbrook traveled. Corporal James Whitfield received a formal written apology from the Dalton Police Department, signed by the interim chief. He attended the first meeting of the new Civilian Oversight Board and sat in the front row and asked 3 questions, each one more precise than the last. The interim chief answered all 3. Whitfield thanked him, which Holt, watching from the back of the room, thought was the most dignified thing he had witnessed in a long time. Holt himself had received 2 offers by December. The FBI's Civil Rights Division had reached out first through official channels. The DOJ had followed a week later. He had accepted the FBI position. His last day at Dalton PD was New Year's Eve. He cleaned out his desk, took his legal pads, and left the building without ceremony, which was how he preferred things. Tamara Wells won a major journalism award in the spring. She donated the prize money to a Millbrook legal aid fund established in January. The fund provided free legal representation to residents facing checkpoint-related charges in neighboring counties where similar programs were now under federal scrutiny. Sandra Ellison was appointed to the city's newly created Civil Rights Compliance Office in February. Her first act was to request the internal complaint logs from all Dalton PD checkpoint operations going back years. Her second act was to actually read them. On a Tuesday morning in March, Several months after the arrest, Vivian Langford drove her sedan down Delmar Avenue on the way to the courthouse. She stopped at the gas station on Forest Street and filled her tank. She bought a bottle of water. She pulled back onto the road. The intersection where the Boundary Avenue checkpoint had stood was empty. Just a road now, open in both directions, traffic moving through it the way traffic is supposed to move, freely, without condition, without someone deciding who belonged and who didn't. She drove through it without slowing down. At the courthouse, she took the elevator to her floor, walked to her chambers, hung her robe on the hook behind the door, and clipped her federal badge to her lapel, beside the small gold pin her mother had given her the morning of her first day on the bench, years earlier. Sandra knocked twice and opened the door. "First case is ready, Your Honor." "Thank you, Sandra." She walked down the corridor to her courtroom. The clerk called it to order. Everyone rose. She took her seat, looked out at the room, the attorneys, the parties, the gallery, the ordinary, extraordinary machinery of a system that was imperfect and slow and worth fighting for every single day, precisely because it was imperfect and slow. She gavelled in, and the work continued. Vivian Langford never used her title to avoid what happened to her. She used it to make sure what happened to her could never keep happening to everyone else. That is the difference between privilege and purpose. Your dignity is not something another person has the authority to take. And sometimes the most powerful thing you can do in the face of humiliation, in the face of injustice, in the face of someone who looks at you and sees only what they want to see, is to remain exactly, completely, unmovably yourself. Because the truth does not require your permission to survive. It only requires one person willing to carry it long enough for the light to find it. If this story stayed with you, leave a comment. Tell us where you're watching from right now. Stories like this one exist because people like you show up for them. If justice matters to you, subscribe. We'll keep telling the stories that need to be told.